Buttons carry some kind of magic, and they certainly can make an outfit special. Even people who don't sew know the value of upgrading the buttons on a coat or suit to make it look more exquisite and expensive. Let's face it, whether you're sewing on a button for style or downright necessity, sooner or later we all have to do it. Let's first spend a minute talking about needles and thread. Buy a package of assorted needles and try them on for size. Just remember, you don't want a needle that's so big it mutilates your fabric or so small you can't thread it. Also, make sure your needle fits through the holes in your button with room to spare. Here's a variety of thread types, and they all work for button sewing. But exercise good sense when you're pairing thread to your garment and its use. The buttons down the front of an overcoat get a lot of use. They are buttoned and unbuttoned multiple times a day. You need heavy-duty thread for these buttons, unlike the buttons you would use on a christening gown or a sheer blouse. For hard use, get a button twist or button craft thread. These threads are 100% polyester or a cotton poly blend, and they're hard to break. This is 100% number 30 silk. It too is strong and easy to sew because it's so smooth. As you can see, these threads are thicker than regular all-purpose sewing thread, but not all thick threads are strong. If they were designed for embroidery, they won't provide the strength needed for holding buttons. On the other side of the performance scale are the very delicate garments where fine threads and buttons are used. All-purpose thread will work in these cases, but make life easy and double, triple, or quadruple your threads in the needle and you'll fly through sewing on the buttons. They'll look neater too. This is how to get multiple threads through your needle. Here, I'm going to thread one folded thread from the middle through the eye. That way, one thread enters the needle doubled and redoubled when it's folded again, and I'm sewing with 8 threads at once. With this many threads in the needle, it's a short order to sew on a button. To knot the thread tails, wrap the thread around your index finger once, roll it off with the thumb, and pull it to the end of the thread with your fingernail. This makes a jumble of thread on the thread tail that locks the thread into position. Center your needle on the right side of the fabric, right where the center of a button will be located, and push it to the wrong side, leaving the knot on the right side. Then turn the needle around and bring it back up through the fabric and collect the button through one of its holes. Fine-tune the position of the button so that it's exactly where you want it and push the needle down through the adjacent hole. Repeat until the button is firmly secured. It depends on how many threads you have through your needle. On the wrong side, stitch a knot by forming a loop, threading through it and pulling tight. Bury the thread tail and clip it close to the fabric. Sometimes you need to add space between the button and the garment to act as a thread shank for your button. To do this, start your button in the same way as before, but after you collect the button, slide a spacer between it and the fabric. A toothpick works well. Continue sewing the button right over the toothpick. When you're satisfied the button is secured, remove the toothpick, bring the thread back up between the fabric and the button, and wrap it around the button threads to make a nice shank. Then tie a knot through the shank Take the thread to the wrong side, bury the tail, and clip the thread. This button will never fall off. If the button has a shank, start your needle from the wrong side, take several stitches through the shank, Then wrap the thread around it. Bring the thread to the wrong side and knot it. Sometimes a button has very large holes like this one. Sewing this button on with thread will just look silly. Instead, sew a piece of trim or cord through the holes, secure it on the back of the button, and then sew the button onto the garment through the cord. This keeps everything in the right proportion for a very stylish button. If you're sewing a row of buttons like this, or the ones going up the back of a wedding dress, use fine thread with 3 or 4 through the eye for a 6 to 8 thread stitch. Anchor your thread on the wrong side and start sewing. Pick up a button, secure it in place, and on the wrong side move up to the next position and repeat. Take a knot every 3rd or 4th button just in case the thread pops. When you reach the end, tie a knot and bury the thread tail. Buttons like this are usually fastened with button loops. Snaps and hooks sew on pretty much the same way as buttons, only these closures don't usually show because they are hidden inside the garment. Just as you did with the flat button, hide the knot under the snap and take a multi-thread stitch around the snap in each hole and knot on the wrong side. If you don't want the stitching to show through to the right side of the fabric, stitch through the facing only. Sew 1/2 of the snap to your garment and then use it to position the other half accurately. Hooks also come in many sizes. There are tiny little hooks for lingerie and heavy-duty hooks for fur coats. You sew them the same way, almost like a whip stitch through the attachment holes and knot the thread out of sight. I'd say we have this pretty well buttoned up, and it was a snap. See you next time.